Yeah, I know you've been itching to talk about this for a while, so I'm really excited to see where we line up and, what we bring to the table that's different. I don't think that my dialogue is especially amazing, but I do like my dialogue. I think it works. It's funny, though, because in a previous episode, I was talking about a story that I went back to after 25 years and I revised it, if you remember. And one of the things that I noticed was, gosh, there's an awful lot of talking in this story. And one of the first things I did was start to cut unessential dialogue. And it just felt better and stronger as a result. So I dig it. I think we're on the right topic.
Yeah. I was just working on the novel that we're trying to look at this season, and I am quite the opposite. I think I'm trying to have scenes where I'm just having dialogue. I guess just because of my theatrical background a little bit, I don't mind if there are parts of a story that sound a little bit more like a play. I mean, obviously you have to have a lot of stuff going on, which, first off, you have to be able to tell who's saying what, and if it's unnecessary. I mean, these are points that we're going to be talking about, that you bring up the points about dialogue, with brevity and things like that. But, I don't know, I'm having fun with it, mainly because I also enjoy that type of humor where two characters might say what to each other like 5 times each, so I'm on the opposite end sometimes of the spectrum. Sometimes it works for me. Sometimes it just needs to get cut.
Well, you have a tendency to write long and then cut back. So I think that's smart, just put it all in there and trim. It's a lot easier to cut than it is to add. But,
yeah.
Yeah.
I think we should, I feel like that's like a first t-shirt slogan for the Tiffin Inn. It's like, it's either the Muse on the front and the Tiffin Inn writing workshop on the back, or it's always easier to cut than it is to add on the
That's
front.
right. Yeah. That and we'll have to have one with your face going, when I was doing improv.
Yeah, with the sort of like the sort of professorial finger in the air, like
Exactly.
Yeah.
And me and well, I've got 5 points about that I need to make. So yeah, we have many t-shirts that we can do. And as luck would have it, I do have 5 points about dialogue. So part of my strategy in looking closely at these topics that we cover, you kind of know good dialogue when you hear it, and bad dialogue when you hear it. But being able to articulate why and how to accomplish the good and avoid the bad, that's where we can kind of get tripped up. So I put a good bit of time into this, probably a couple of weeks of doing some soul searching, some internet searching, some, historical sort of research in my own work just to see where it failed and where it succeeded. And I feel like I've got 5 good areas that you can focus on to make sure that your dialogue is doing the work that it can do. And so I kind of want to go through those now. Is that okay with you?
I'm ready to go.
All right, well, let's do it. So there's 5 key elements of high quality dialogue according to Art. And again, as with everything, this is according to Art. These aren't hard and fast rules. Take what works, discard what doesn't. But I was thinking about it, what makes it really good? And it's these 5 things: melody, brevity, plausibility, tension, and subtext. And sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, almost like you go to the buffet and there's too many choices and you're like, oh my God, where do I start? And that's how I felt when I was looking at dialogue. It's like, my word, there's so many rules, or let's put that in quotes, rules that you need to follow and things you need to keep in mind. It can be overwhelming, but we should start with the basics. You've been out in the world, right? And you've heard people talk.
Yes.
Right?
They've let me out on Tuesdays from 3 to 5. I go to the corner deli and I just get a pastrami sandwich. That's all I see of the world.
And you just listen. That's right.
And I just listen in.
It's not creepy at all.
to the old folks just trading tales of how the days used to be.
That's it. Well, in my research, I was watching some clip footage of Aaron Sorkin, who has, I think, some of the most recognizable dialogue from a stylistic standpoint in all of modern writing. Like, you can tell if it's a Sorkin movie just by the way the characters talk. And one of the things that Sorkin says that I really identify with is the idea that dialogue as a spoken medium is very much akin to music. It's got rhythm and meter and tone and all these things. It's very musical. I like to think of it as lyrical, but, that's why I call it melody, because there really is an intonation, there's a cadence to good dialogue, and it has kind of a pleasing quality on the ear. Now, you've done a ton of stage work, so does that ring true for you?
Yeah, it does. And the melody can be there's so many different melodies out there. That's what's so nice about it. We just talked about, I like dialogue a lot, and sometimes I really enjoy it because, when you read a play, it's all dialogue. That's all you're doing. And so, yeah, there can be a melody to it. But I think one of the things that I keep forgetting is when writing dialogue, everyone has their own melody, and that's something that I sometimes forget. Like, sometimes you can show your characters because they'll have different melodies, different ways that they speak. And that's something to try and pay attention to.
Yeah, that's a great point, because you can tell which character is which, or you should be able to tell which character is which by the way that they're speaking. I know in a previous episode you'd mentioned a great way to kind of get into a scene quickly is to have this kind of high and low sensibility of the character. Are they high status or low status?
Yeah.
And the way that they speak would be very different, right? Like, I could put you on the spot and go, Tim, what's a low status character sound like? Go! And then you would do your thing.
Well, I mean,
I'm not going to make you do it.
I was ready to do a scene. I was ready to go.
Oh, we can if you want. Like, you're an improv guy. I'm not. I'm very the antithesis of improv. But yeah, feel free. Do whatever you like.
No, that's okay. But I think it's very true. I think when you're, when writing characters, I think on a very basic level, sometimes I'm like, is this character going to be a high status or low status? Will their melodies, take over the room, or are they subtler tones, subtler melodies that don't want to take up much space because they're a lower status character?
Yeah, and you can think about, like, if you're doing realistic either screenwriting or fiction work, and you want to root a character in a certain time frame, there are ways of speaking in those different time frames that are very easy to spot. I love the old 1930s newsreel type.
Oh man, yeah.
And the ship is leaving the dock, and we're going off to France, and what a jolly good sail it will be this time. The sun is shining, the birds are singing. Like that. There's a very specific way that sounds, and if I did those words in my own voice, it wouldn't have the same impact. To do that in a novel, what are some tactics that you might use to kind of get that melody of that particular character, whether it's very pleasing or whether it's more staccato? Like, what are some tactics that you use to really kind of showcase that person's voice?
I think it's sentence structure. I think it's the melody and the sentence structure. Some characters that I have written tend to speak in longer sentences because they are, let's just talk about the novel that I'm working on right now. I have a character, it's very early on. I'm only at 10,000 words for this, but so far I've developed a character who speaks in very, very, very long sentences because they are extremely insecure and just want to be, they're the person that you work with who just talks too much because they don't have a society outside of work. Work is their place. So those sentences are longer, and they're more verbose. They're more unnecessarily verbose. I don't know if that was redundant to say unnecessarily verbose, but they just have longer sentences that string together. And then I've just sort of been trying to figure out who my bad guy is, and so I was experimenting with another character who works at an athletic shoe store, whose sentences are shorter and don't have as much. They're a little rougher. And those are very basic, and those are very, stereotypical. We expect sometimes maybe the bad guy to be a little bit more rough and tumble. But the sentence length helps me a lot in defining characters.
I think that's smart if you have characters that are going to be set up in opposition. So if they're in a scene and they have different goals in the scene, having them speak with different length sentences would be a very easy way to sort of showcase, maybe the ease or the fluidity of one character versus the sort of unease because if you have somebody who speaks in really short sentences, it might mean that they're trying to end the conversation quickly.
Exactly. Yeah. Who, if you have tension or conflict in a scene, are they both looking for the tension? Are they both looking for the conflict? Their language might escalate things. They might know how to push each other's buttons. It's something I love listening to other people talk because it shows you, for example, Akira Kurosawa, and now I'm really going to shoot my mouth off here, a long time ago said that filmmakers should try to make films through the images, but only add dialogue when the image can't support what you're trying to say. And I kind of feel like for me, I love doing the opposite when I'm writing. I want to try and show as much of the character or show as much of the action as I can through dialogue. It's it's my favorite tool to use when telling a story. And, melody is such a fun part of that you have to explore, who is this? How are they going to state what they need? Are they going to use a long sentence? Are they not? Are they going to use a run-on sentence? Are they bad? Do they not have a lot of grammar? Are they, these things are just really great.
Well, that brings us to the next one, which is brevity. And look, again, not as a hard and fast rule, because you just got finished saying you have a character who talks too much. And I think that's cool because you're doing it on purpose. So what I mean by brevity is wasted words that get in the way. And you mentioned this earlier, the fact that you say in regular conversation, a lot, and I just did it in the last sentence, right? So there are these filler words that we all use, minor and most people do that, or you'll repeat the same phrase a few times. The trick about really good dialogue is to not faithfully reproduce the way people actually speak, because that's a kind of torture. Instead, what we're trying to do is clean out the clutter. Because when real people talk, they just kind of fill the air with words, right? In dialogue, we're trying to pare away the words that we don't need and just leave the ones that convey the meaning that we actually need to do. So in many ways, we're eliminating the small talk of everyday life. And that's a good thing. So when you've got somebody in your story, Tim, who is talking too much, that is there on purpose to demonstrate that person's, what did you say? It was their insecurity. Is that what you said?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So that's demonstrating their insecurity. Right. Yeah. And I think that's really clever.
It's very difficult. Yes. Because part of me disagrees with that statement. Like, man, I love small talk. But the small talk that I'm using is to really set up the scene and to kind of show you who these people are. And so, yeah, it is tough to kind of say, I really want to show, like, let's say, for example, you have some characters they're at the local grocery store and they're looking for food. That scene obviously has to be important to your story, and the conversation has to do something that is showing something that those characters need or they want or what they're trying to attain. And so I think that is 300, 500 level, writing skills that I would love to have, is just being able to do that. If you can do that scene with small talk, with just a couple of things that makes it seem like these two people are just talking, but we actually know that it's about something else. Oh man, I tip my hat to you, sir, madam, whoever.
Yeah. Well, and I think that leads into the whole idea of subtext. So if I'm hearing you correctly, the idea that people are talking about something, but underneath the surface, they're really talking about something else. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Yes.
And then, because mainly in this very early spot of the novel that I'm working on, I am trying to find for myself the setting and what the relationships are and who these people are. So yeah, it's a very nice way for me to, through this dialogue that I'm creating, who these characters are, what is their status, what is their ranking within the other characters, what is their relationship to the others, but also like, what do they want? What is the subtext?
Yeah. So you see a lot of stories where people say exactly what they feel, and especially those stories that are not very good. They may be okay, but they're not great literature or they're not great films. I think about a lot of those movies that get churned out very quickly by, say, the Lifetime channel or whatever, that they end up having a lot of on-the-nose dialogue. And what we mean by on-the-nose is that the character says exactly what they are thinking or feeling, and there is no, opportunity to hide it or think about your life. The only times that you probably are speaking authentically, right, out in public are when you're very angry or very emotional, right? And when you're in a normal conversation with people, sort of in the regular course of your day, if you're frustrated, there's a decent chance that you're not trying to express the depth of your frustration. It's almost like a road rage incident. So let's say you're on the train and you're very frustrated because you're going to work, you're going to have a difficult conversation with somebody you don't want to go to begin with. Maybe you're hot, it's cramped and crowded, so your mind is in a bad spot. And then somebody bumps into you, right? They don't apologize. What might you say in that instance, right? You might not say anything. You might just sort of deep sigh. But if you choose to say something, are you going to tap the person on the shoulder and go, "Excuse me, you need to watch my personal space"? You could. That's a different character choice than, oh, no, excuse me. That kind of thing, which is more of a sarcasm, right? They both kind of say the same thing, but one of them is more plausible because that sounds like what a passive-aggressive person might do to sort of express their displeasure, but not on the nose. So there's so many different ways to do that. And that's why having so many different writers attack the same basic, premises from different angles, you get wildly different results. It's a lot of fun to see how people try to express the tension of a scene through dialogue without sort of calling out the exact, emotional tone and tenor to just kind of lay it out on the table. You know what I mean? You want to, treat that stuff as though it is, in the real world, and people aren't open books. They don't say exactly what they mean. And, if they do all the time, it might not actually make a good character. Like, I don't know. It's hard to know. What do you think? I'm talking too much. What do you think?
No, I think that's the fun of it. I think that's the fun of it. If you take, getting someone bumping into you, with their car and that situation that you were just talking about, I think that's what's so much fun to try and explore. If you, as the writer, are trying to convey that your character is a certain person, how do they react? Are they going to put their, I've seen stories where the character would turn around and tell them, "Look, you know what? I'm having a bad day and I got to go talk to my boss." That's the fun of it for me. That's what I find most exciting, is figuring out what dialogue your character is representing themselves with in public and in private. In the dialogue that they have, what are they going to say to someone who's close to them, someone who's not close to them, to a boss, to a coworker, to an employee? That's what I love, is choosing how the character's dialogue is going to react in situations just like that. I just love it so much.
Yeah, and there's a lot of opportunity to do it, right? Especially since you have kind of dialogue forward stories, which I think is great, because one of the strengths of your writing is you can tell instantly who's speaking. Like, you really pay attention to having different modes of speech between characters. If you got two people talking in a story and they're in the same scene, really good chance that they're different enough that it's easy to tell who's who. And it kind of, like I've said this before, you can really tell what time frame the story is in just by the quality of the dialogue. So your sense of voice is really strong. So I dig that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you.
The thing that I need to get better at is tension in the dialogue. So if you've got two people and they are in an argument, and they're not sort of finger pointing and yelling right at the top of their lungs, you hurt me too. Like, this is terrible, right? So if they need to express this in a way that's more plausible, and you want to still feel that tension, having them talking about something else, but clearly underneath the surface is that subtext. That's what I need to get better at. And I've read some things and seen some videos about dialogue being attacking and defending. And I like that to a point. I kind of think of it more like a tennis match. You know how somebody serves and then the person on the other side of the net hits it back, then you hit it back, and you hit it back, and eventually somebody wins the point. To me, that's what a conversation feels like in fiction, not in real life, but in fiction. Because in real life, you can just share information and share stories and have small talk, and it can be very pleasant. There doesn't need to be tension in every conversation, unless you're talking to Tim. But anyway. But exactly. But as a power dynamic, it's really interesting to see where certain characters will sort of probe for weakness, and other characters might try to evade something that they don't want to talk about. And that's a kind of attacking and defending. It doesn't always have to be I'm accusing you of something and you're trying to, accuse me back or trying to avoid that. It can be as simple as I'm trying to get you to admit that you feel a certain way about something. And so I'll use, the cookie jar as a proxy for that and go, do you like these cookies? Yeah, they're all right. No, but do you like the cookies? Like, the cookies are so good, right? And you have this whole conversation about the cookies when it's really about the quality of their relationship.
Right. Yeah. Tension. I think that is one of my hang-ups as well. I feel like sometimes I avoid tension. I avoid conflict in life. I don't like conflict. And I know that a lot of folks are like that. And so I think that sometimes I naturally avoid that, in my writing and try and figure out a different way to do it. I'm trying to think back on my own stuff, but yeah, it's something that I do wish that I could get better at. And yes, I think too, one of the things that I've started to try and do is just what you're saying, is that sort of that tennis match of a back and forth to try and make something that feels like it has a little bit of tension. But yeah, I feel like, I just got to admit, like, that's one of those things that I'm not as confident about as having two characters just do like BS small talk to show what their work relationship is like and who they are as people.
Yeah, so the tension in a conversation comes from people who want different things, right? So if I'm wanting you to admit that you cheated on your girlfriend and you don't want to admit that, right? Then that becomes the tennis match where I serve and try to get you to trip up on something, and then you volley back and maybe try to deflect into a different conversation entirely. And then I might even go in that direction and then kind of pivot back, Columbo style, and try to kind of trip you up. So, I mean, that may be one way to generate tension in a scene where it's clear that there are two different goals at work, and probably only one of them is going to be the result. And so the conversation is just how it plays out. So I think if you come in with that sensibility of what are these two people, and I'm assuming it's just a conversation between two people, what do these two people want that's different? This person A wants this and person B wants this other thing, and then you just wind them up and turn them loose, And I think your strategy of doing small talk is a great way to write yourself into the conversation. So you do too much, and then when you kind of find the thread or the vein of that conversation and it kind of works itself to that natural resolution, in the editing process, you just come back and see how much of the small talk needs to stay, and how much of it can be removed now that you've found the really important, interesting part of the conversation.
Yeah. I'm also, I think I've got another dimension that I'm thinking about, because the novel that I'm trying to work on is kind of sort of my own kind of like a noir piece, sort of like a detective novel. I'm kind of also in this mindset where I think I want some of my dialogue to be I need to put some red herrings in is what I'm trying to say. So
Yeah.
having some details and having some conversation about some details that happen, we see these things in movies all the time where someone, or in books, these detective novels where someone says something that comes back later. It's like, wait a minute, that one time that Professor, Higginbotham said that he went to Paris on a Tuesday, he's the murderer. Like, I'm very excited about adding little details like that. But also, if you haven't listened to this podcast a long time, Art knows very well that I will fail when I put the gimmick in front of the story. And that's something that I do a lot. So it's also something that I'd like to not get too caught up in. And so with some of those details that I'm interested in with the noir, there also has to be tension. There has to be tension for this to work as a detective novel. So I'm excited because walking the dog the other day, I've got a couple scenes in line that I really want to write to move forward. And one of them will be a scene where I'm early stages where I have two characters meeting that I need to have some tension. So yeah, I think I'll take some of those pointers and try and work that way.
You have really good instincts. Your intuition is really good, and you've consumed voraciously the content in that style. Like you're very well read, and you've watched a ton of those kinds of movies. So what I would ask is, have you done any research about, and this might not be your style, so feel free to say no, but have you done any research on the structure of that kind of story? Because it feels like Agatha Christie, Dashiell Hammett, these guys wrote a certain style and probably have a structure that you could follow if you're so inclined, because then you could subvert that, for your reader, for the modern reader. And I love the idea of putting in red herrings. That's very smart. But yeah, there's got to be that central through line, and the expectation that I would have coming to that, even if it's modern day, even if it's set in the here and now, I would still want the flavor, the melody of the old school 1930s gumshoe kind of movie, like that just feels like it should be there. Don't you think?
I'm very excited about all of the dialogue in Twin Peaks. David Lynch has a lot of humor that is, last week when we talked about exposition, we talked about Shakespeare doing a very good job of, handing you the Gravediggers, very lighthearted, and then we get into Alas, Poor Yorick. So this sort of light and dark, humorous and serious. And I love the way that David Lynch does that. I love the way that he does it in Twin Peaks. And I'm also a very, very big fan, and this goes right to the point that you just made, the dialogue in Rian Johnson's Brick. Brick is, I'm not sure I've talked about it too much here. And actually that's an honest statement. Usually I'm like, I really don't know if I've talked too much about my improv history when I know full well, but Brick from Rian Johnson is my absolute favorite movie that's come out this century. Within it, he obviously was drawing from a lot of those old films, those old noir films as well, to where there is an entire kind of noirish high schooler language that he creates within that script. So it's definitely something that I have taken a lot of inspiration from. And yes, I have also thought about those older movies and thought, how can I stick in say, what's the big idea? Something. Yeah. So it's just fun to play with it because language and dialogue, and we have, working with the English language, which is the biggest fucking car crash of a language. We can use so many different words. I only know 30 of them, but you have the opportunity to have characters who are very, very distinct because of those melodies, because of the language, because of what they're using. I just get so excited thinking about it, about getting back to it and being like, let's write more dialogue.
Yeah, you can also accomplish that through narration. I don't know if you have a first person or it's third person you're writing in right now, correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So you would have to do it through dialogue. But I remember a lot of those gumshoe type detective novels were written in first person. And they would always start out with the, Sam Spade character, right? Sitting in the office, probably smoking a cigarette, talking about his last case, and then in walks the femme fatale, and she had gams for days, and like all this, right, all this garbage. Yeah, I mean, as much of that as you can kind of echo back to, I think that would be super fun. And obviously it wouldn't be the through line or a central tentpole of the story, because you have it firmly rooted in the modern, and the people involved might not even read those books. Like, I don't know, but it would be really nice as Easter eggs to kind of leave those for the readers.
Yeah. And I guess my concern is knowing my past history of how I put too much, like I just said, of the gimmick in front of the story. I guess I might be a little bit more nervous about it this time. I want to see if I can be a little bit more genuine with my dialogue, but still have fun with it. So I think I'm just trying to find that fine line between the two.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And look, it sounds like you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to be perfect on your first draft. Please don't do that. Please.
I've never done that. Are you kidding me?
Please don't
pressure on myself.
Yeah, exactly. Please
I don't want to do the edits. I don't want to rewrite. Can't it just be perfect in that? Son of a.
Yeah. The answer is no. But it's okay, because I'm here to read everything you write, and I'm here to cheer you on. I'm your cheerleader.
And I am here for you.
Thank you. Yes, as soon as I start writing, I'll appreciate that. Just for anybody who's still listening, I have been working on a book that is nonfiction, and it is a rule book for a role-playing game that is coming out in 2024. And this thing is up to about 17,500 words right now. So I am actually writing, Tim. It's just that I'm not doing any fiction.
And hey, that is important writing. Whatever writing you're doing is important writing.
Yeah, I'm on deadline. We kind of wanted to launch it in 2024, and we need to get it test played in 2023. So that window is rapidly closing. But yeah, I mean, I've been doing draft 0 on my book, and probably have, close to 3,000 words on that, which is, a decent sized treatment. But I don't have a full movement yet. And I'm really interested in kind of diving into these different pieces. But what I've noticed is that when I start to map out, the story structure, I tend to get lost in the minutia. Like it's almost like when you're walking in the woods, and let's say you have a 1.5 mile hike, and you're like, all right, we're going to go from point A to point B. It's going to take us, 35, 40 minutes. Okay, here we go. And so you go on your leisurely walk, and then you see a butterfly, and you're like, ooh, a butterfly. And then you drift off the path, and you're like, I should look up some other butterflies, because I'm really interested in you know what I mean? And then it's like, right. What kind of flowers are butterflies attracted to? Oh, wait a minute. What kind of flowers are natural to this environment? Oh, well, right. Let's look at climate. How has the climate changed in the last 100 years? And this is what I do. So I do all this research, and it's procrastination, but I'm a genuinely inquisitive person. I just like to learn new things. And so when I'm writing stories, like, for example, I'm still on the fence about whether this is a hard sci-fi or kind of one of those softer things where I can just go spaceships, lasers, and then move on with things. But I keep trying to justify what's happening. So I'm like, well, wait a minute. If they're terraforming a new planet, like, where would that planet even be? So I start researching, potentially habitable planets within 100 light years. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. How would they have even gotten there? And now I'm, going backward in time to try to figure out, well, how far in the future does this have to be plausible? And none of it fucking matters. Like, I can just make it up, but I
think it's that's what I absolutely love about you and me. I just think I just love it, because as long as, we're both the same fucking person that we were like 30 years ago in some ways, right? Yeah. Am I wrong?
No, you're
because
right.
Because I'm over here like, what kind of planet? I don't know, a Z-Forma blogger score planet. And I just wish that I had the patience to do the research that you do, because I do believe it would give me so much more dimension to the shit stories that I write, because it comes from an informed place. Bill Watterson, who famously created Calvin and Hobbes, was like, sometimes I think if I remember, because I like burned it into my head, I think it was sometimes the best way to generate new ideas is to go out and learn something. And he said that statement in a piece when he was writing about when he started to insert dinosaurs, I think, into Calvin and Hobbes, because he started reading about dinosaurs. So yeah, I just wish I had that. I wish I had your patience. I wish I had that inquisitive mind to be like, I remember you were into submarines for a second. You were writing a story, correct?
Yeah. I researched the difference between nuclear submarines and diesel-powered submarines from World War I. And I got so deep into it, I knew the quality of the air and the difference in the quality of the air on the two submarines. Spoiler alert, a diesel-fueled submarine. Yeah, the nuclear is clean air, and the diesel fuel is noxious. So, but I had this, I don't even remember what the story was, but I was trying to write a story about, I think it was about a sub that sank and sort of what happened. In fact, I think I've even brought that up a couple of times as a random, like, oh, well, if the story's about blah, blah, like I must have dredged that up from my subconscious because that was a while back. Yeah. Well, look, okay. It's a therapy time with art. I don't like open water. And one of those things, I remember reading, Friedrich Nietzsche back in college, and Nietzsche's like, eternal recurrence. And I'm like, the fuck is that? He's like, yes, the life that you've lived is the life that you've lived before, and you'll keep living it over and over again in perpetuity. And I'm like, okay, that's very interesting. Like, why is that, Nietzsche? And then you flip a few pages and you read, and his explanation is, because I'm Nietzsche! That's why. And I'm like, fuck you, Nietzsche. So maybe I'm remembering that wrong, but that was the way I remembered it as a kid. And I'm like, all right, fucking fine. But you read about, reincarnation, you read about, sort of being brought back to life and whether there are multiple past lives and shit like that. And one of the things that allows me to imagine that past lives are possible is that I'm inordinately interested in certain periods of history for no good reason. And one of them is the Battle of Jutland. And that the Battle of Jutland was in, I think 1916. But it was the two massive fleets that came together, the British and the Germans, and a bunch of ships were sunk. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And I hate open water. Like I swam out into a lake. We went to a lake on vacation 10 or 15 years ago. Kids were small. And it was a lake in Alabama that was very far inland, and it had this really nice, it's actually an interesting story. It was one of these like rickety ass resorts, right? And so, and they had this giant slide, this like water slide that they would tout, but it was basically a bunch of barrels that had been, the bottom of the barrels had been removed, and like these plastic barrels that they had lashed together with bungee cords. And you would get in and you would go through this long barrel, and the thing was probably, I'm not joking, like 40 feet in the air. So you have to climb this ladder. Basically it's pilings, right? So they've mounted this fucking bucket launcher on pilings, and you climb up, and like, it spits you out into this lake. Well, I didn't do that, but of course my daughter did. She's like, woo, she had no fear. She was very young and thought everything is fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we let her do it once, and I'm like, nope, call it. Time of death, we're good, But this lake was really pretty. It was one of these like really calm lakes, and they had a little diving platform, not too far out into the lake. You could swim to it and dive off and hang out and whatnot. So my wife says, let's swim out with the kids. The kids all had, not floaties, they had life vests on, right? So the kids are fine. I don't have that, but like I can swim. I used to be on swim team. I used to be a fish. It was fine. So we start swimming out to the thing, and I go white as a sheet and can't continue to swim. Like I just start treading water, and I'm terrified because I can't see the bottom of the lake, because like most lakes you can't see. And my wife's like just swimming out, mermaid style, and she looks back, hey, and she sees my, deathly face, and she's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, go back. So I turn around and fucking swim back. And so when I was climbing out of the lake, it had that consistency on the bottom of my feet where it was this really kind of slimy,
Yeah.
mud, but it also had like sharp granite rocks, and so we called it Lake Squishy Sharp because that's the way it felt on my feet. Like, so that's Lake Squishy. I don't know what the actual lake is called. It is Lake Squishy Sharp. So, I don't know why I'm telling you this story.
I think it's all about dialogue. It's all about dialogue. Here's my story. I'm going to give you my quick story. Oh my gosh, this is back around the turn of the century. And long story short, there was a young woman and we were sort of courting in a way. And it was getting late at night one night and we were relatively drunk and she was like, we should go skinny dipping in Lake Ontario. And Lake Ontario being one of the Great Lakes, is, Rochester is set on Lake Ontario. And I was like, of course, let's go skinny dipping. I'd love to go skinny dipping because, you're trying to be cool.
Right.
If a young woman that you're attracted to suggests you go skinny dipping, or a young person that you're attracted to, whoever you're attracted to, it says that, you have to say yes.
It's the rule.
And so I'm just, that's the rule. It's nighttime. We're getting undressed. We're laughing. We're giggling. We're by that lighthouse that's in Irondequoit, if anybody knows where I'm talking about. I think it was Irondequoit. But, so she gets in the water and she paddles out and I think I cracked a joke probably. It was probably very charming and very timely and very funny. And I got out there and I started to swim out to her. And then my foot touched seaweed and I screamed like a banshee and I got out of that water so fast. I was like, absolutely not.
That's hot.
Super hot. We went far. We went very, very far.
Oh yeah, that's the secret sauce. I'll tell you. So we told two stories, and thank you for sharing that. That was funny. So we have two stories. If you were to transcribe both of those stories, there would be you knows and ums and uhs and all kinds of fun stuff. Maybe some repetition, certainly some cursing on my end. That maybe you don't want to retain. And so one of the things that we can offer is that what you're searching for is the plausibility of the dialogue. You want to make sure that it feels natural, but it doesn't have to be this word-for-word transcription of what someone would actually say. So as long as you can kind of, use that brevity to remove those wasted words and just keep the things that tell that story very cleanly and make it feel like a natural, effortless kind of story, then you're in good shape. The one thing that we haven't mentioned, and I'm surprised that I have forgotten it up until now, is reading your work out loud. Right? Reading the dialogue out loud. Absolutely essential, because if it sounds wrong, if it feels wrong, then it is. Like, it's just not good. So you can always tell when you read it out loud.
Yeah, it's one of the most important things, and I love that too about the dialogue. Maybe it's because of my theater background, just sort of like, I usually end up sitting on the couch that I'm actually sitting at right now, popping open the laptop, putting the laptop on a pillow in my lap. I got my afternoon coffee ready to go, and then working through the dialogue, just speaking it out loud, it helps so much. I mean, we've talked about it before, and just reading your work out loud is going to help your work in general, but especially when it comes to dialogue. If you're trying to write a specific character who talks in a specific kind of way, you have to make sure that it's consistent, and personally, I think the best way to do that is to just read it out loud. Hear it. Hear yourself saying.
Yeah. And there's other ways you can do it as well. You can have other people read it for you. I've heard of writers who hand their manuscript over to a trusted ally, and that person will read it into a recording device and then give it back to the writer. Now that takes a lot of work if you're talking about a really long thing, but maybe you can do that with, dialogue heavy sections, for example. And you're like, I really want to make sure, because sometimes, like, especially you, Tim, you're a very good performer. And I notice the difference between the refills that you do and the refills that I do. Mine are more like clinical trials, and yours are like exciting sitcoms. And, like, it's like, mine's like the fucking, when they read all the potential side effects of the drug, following these rules may cause anal bleeding. Like all these things.
You know what my refills are? My refills are when Tracy Gold in Growing Pains starts to question herself and she goes back and she reads all of her old papers to see if she legitimately got A's and she realizes they were all bullshit. Those are my refills.
Oh my. Well, no, but they definitely feel different. But one thing that I've noticed when I do my refills is I like to have this might not be good then. I like to have the computer read it back to me. So under review in the most current version of Word is a function called speech, and it says read aloud. And you can literally choose the avatar, the voice model. There's like two dudes and a female voice that are part of the main package, and I think you can download a bunch of other ones that are probably smoother and better.
I remember back in the day when TomToms were big. Those were the early GPS, and you could download people like Susie Izzard into it, where she would say things like, take the next left. Not this one, but the next. Or like Yoda or Darth Vader, things like that. So I really wish you could download. Although I really wouldn't mind the old school robot voice reading my pieces.
Nice. My wife turned me on to Waze, which I don't use, but I'm aware of it. And I think Keith Morrison from Dateline had his voice on Waze for a while. So Keith Morrison could tell you, turn left if you dare. Like that kind of thing.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I think with Waze, you can record like friends or someone giving you directions too, I think. I tried it once and I was like, I'm going to get this whole, cause I was doing, I think it was Blithe Spirit. I was playing Charles Condamine in Blithe Spirit, and I learned about Waze. I was like, I'm going to get my all of the castmates that I have in the show to like put in directional stuff so that I could just remember my cast. It didn't work. I got too lazy with it.
Yeah. The read aloud function, I use it a lot. Even though it's kind of a mechanical voice, it does have pretty impressive intonation. And it can, even though it's a little monotone, it can definitely point out when a sentence is clunky. And I shouldn't say point out. To me, I'm listening for a certain melody when I write, and I want to and that's why I think my nonfiction is so good, because I really do spend a lot of time honing the language, fortunately, I'm not making things up whole cloth, so I have a frame of reference that I can refer back to. But the read aloud function has absolutely made a huge difference in the quality of my prose, because I can hear where it clunks, and I can just stop, go fix it, and then put the cursor back at the beginning of that sentence and listen to it again. And it's less stressful for me to do it that way than it would be for me to read it, because the reason I brought up your refills earlier, you're a very good performer. And I think if you read some of my earlier drafts, you could probably make them sound good because you're a good performer, but they're not good. So the computer, the read aloud function, can't perform. And so it just shines a spotlight on the crap. And that's the reason that, maybe I don't want to read my own work, because I'm performing. I know the way it's supposed to sound, and maybe I kind of put the emphasis where I want it to be, and that makes it sound a little more natural or a little better. The computer has no clue. And so it really does shine a spotlight on where it's not working. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good function. I might try that out. That sounds great. Or I wonder if Siri can do that for you as well.
Probably. Yeah. I don't see why not. But anyway, dialogue has to be heard out loud. And so whether you get someone else to read it, or you get the computer to read it, or you read it yourself, reading it out loud is absolutely critical. And I think, as we kind of wrap up the conversation, we've got those 5 kind of tent poles: melody, brevity, plausibility, tension, and subtext. It's really easy to dissect things, right? But you might be sitting there going, all right, Tim and Art, fine. I'll go along with the 5 tent poles. Like, what am I supposed to do with this? Well, I don't know. I think it's things that you want to think about I think not thinking about it when you're writing your dialogue, right? Just go write your dialogue. Write the way you think people should sound for your work. And then when you have it read aloud by the computer or by someone else or by yourself, and it doesn't feel right, that's when you can come back to these 5 things and go, all right, is it one of these things that maybe is kind of throwing it off? For example, if it's a really long monologue and you're like, my God, this is taking a while to get through. Maybe at that point, brevity is the answer, and maybe you look for ways to kind of tighten up the language. If it sounds clunky, where the emphasis is on the wrong part of the sentence, there's great opportunities out there to see sentences read different ways, and it really does make a difference to have the emphasis on the right one. Like I was trying to think of a good example, and I came up with, I didn't mean to buy that today. So, and you could do this with pretty much any sentence, but like the sentence, I didn't mean to buy that today. If you emphasize a different word, it has a different meaning, right? Like, I didn't mean to buy that today has a different meaning than I didn't mean to buy that today, which is different from I didn't mean to buy that today, right?
Yeah.
Like basically whatever word you hit, or I didn't mean to buy that today, that's the same words, but the emphasis tells us where the important part of the meaning is. So there's a lot of opportunity to use brevity and kind of trim down to only the things you need, and then to use that emphasis and the cadence of speech to help get your point across. Yeah. But that's how I would use them, and that's how I'm going to try to use them, is I'm just going to do what I want to do to start with, and not sort of edit myself from the beginning of the work, because that's not fun, right? And writing is supposed to be as much fun as we can make it, because it's hard work. So like, have your first draft, knock yourself out, do whatever you want to do. But when you look at it critically, you've had a little bit of distance, you come back to it and go, short of genius, right? That's my favorite phrase when I read my previous work, and I'm like, okay, short of genius. All right, let's try again. Then now we've got 5 different filters or lenses that we can use to look at the dialogue and go, does it not have any tension? Yeah, this guy's telling me what the weather is. Like, fuck. Okay, well, how can I do that in a way that's more interesting? I don't know. So, but you can kind of work through that, or maybe it's people don't talk like this, right? Like it's super flowery language, and or people are using, or like your high status, low status. You have somebody who's low status who maybe doesn't have much of an education, using words like erudite and didgeridoo and plethora, exactly. All these words that they really wouldn't be exposed to. So, like, why are they using those words? Anyway, that's the whole point of this, is that these 5 tent poles, these 5 kind of lenses that you can look at your dialogue, go ahead and write what you want to write. But then if you feel like it's not working, trust that feeling and use these lenses to see if one or more, right? Most of the time there's kind of an overlap, but like one of them is going to jump out at you as, I really need to make sure that there's tension in this conversation. This is running on too long. I need to make this brief. One of them is going to jump out at you.
Yeah. One of the things that's very difficult, we used to say this about like rhyming games and improv, is that it's very easy to rhyme, but it's very difficult to do a scene where you're just got this gimmick where you're rhyming and move the action forward. So yeah, it's also something that you need to kind of keep an eye on too, is like dialogue has to help propel things. That's why I think some of these points are very, very important, because sometimes my dialogue is just making me laugh and not doing anything to serve the story.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a joke and it's funny, but it doesn't advance character or advance plot, then maybe there's a better way to use dialogue. And maybe you don't have to throw away the joke. Maybe you just need the conversation to work a little harder. So that's the one thing. I don't want people to get the wrong idea. I'm not saying that you should discard everything that you've ever done and like start over doing only these 5 things. That's ridiculous. But I do think that very often I write something that I think is good, and I come back a day or a week or a month later and read it and go, God, I thought that was good. Like, I don't know if that happens to you, Tim, but that happens to me all the time. And yeah. And the refining is where I really find the joy. So I think the initial writing, I hate initial drafting. I like editing. I like refining it because it's fun to see it get better. I just did the cover art for the source book that I'm writing. And I'm not an artist. This is like compiling clip art and text boxes and whatnot, but it requires a little bit of skill. So the first mock-up I did was not great. And I showed it to people thinking, this is good. Like, I know this isn't the final, but like, it's close, right? And they're like, So I'm like, well, let me try something else. And so I tried something else, and it was better. And it was different, but better. And I'm like, this is great. Do you think we could use this? And they're like, no. So I went back to
Yeah.
the drawing board. I did, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I did 5 versions until the 6th version was the one that we finally settled on. And each version got a little better. And that's the way we write. It's got to be
Yeah.
incremental improvement over time. So I really like having these lenses to kind of look through: the melody, brevity, plausibility, tension, and subtext, just as, you could even take your existing dialogue and just go one at a time and go, okay, well, here's my existing dialogue. Let me look at this just from a melody standpoint. Click, you tell the computer to read it out loud, and you just kind of listen to it. Does it sound musical? Does it create the kind of cadence and tone and sensation that you're going for that matches that character? Especially if you've got two characters who are very different, like we were talking about before, and one of them has maybe a very staccato way of speaking. Maybe it's clipped. Maybe they speak in sentence fragments because they're just not very, and the other one wants to be more effervescent and long-winded. And so you have that really nice dichotomy. Just setting up that alone creates a tension in the conversation, because the person who speaks quickly may want to end the conversation, whereas the other person wants to extend it. And that is tension.
Yeah.
So they're not disagreeing about anything other than talking or not talking, but that alone might make it a really interesting scene. I could talk about this for literally 5 hours, so I'm going to stop. Tim, what would you like to say about dialogue as we wrap up?
I think it's a great tool. I think it's the best tool because, essentially your stories are going to be about characters, and characters have to interact with each other. Unless you're some amazing writer and you write a story about one person, and I'm sure those stories exist, and you're going to say, oh, that book, and I'll be like, oh, yeah, I never read it. But it's a great tool. It's a great tool for a lot of different things that you can have in your story. And I love playing with it. And I think these 5 are a very good analytical tool that I can learn, try and tune in. I think it was when you said earlier, you've got to listen to that voice that tells you something is wrong. That's a voice that I need to tune into more because, again, because I'm lazy, I don't want to listen to it because I know that means it's going to be more work. And these 5 tools that you've come up with are going to help me kind of tune on that a little bit more.